Hello and welcome to the Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffett. I'll be your host. Today we have Captain Kirk, or Kirk Beck, online with us. He's our guest speaker today. Captain Kirk, how are you?
I'm fine, and I'm pleased to be here, James.
Yes. Hey, as I told you earlier, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and you look very similar to Jean-Luc Picard, who was one of the famous captains on Starship Enterprise.
I take that as a compliment.
It is a compliment, actually. So I'm going to read this from your Podmatch profile, and we can kind of jump off of that. And it says, Kirk Beck's deep understanding of constitutional rights, especially through the power of paper, aligns with your interest in liberty and the Second Amendment. The episode could explore how legal frameworks and citizen empowerment intersect in defending civil liberties. So, Captain Kirk, if you'll introduce yourself to the listening audience, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Captain Kirk was born in South Dakota many years ago. Educated in Rapid City at the South Dakota School of Mines, graduated with an engineering degree. Shortly thereafter, I had the opportunity to be commissioned into the United States Army. I spent 6 months at Fort Belvoir, Virginia at the end of the Vietnam War. This is the Vietnamization of the war. Second lieutenants were not going into the Army, they were being pushed out of the Army. So my 6-month stay was brief, and I had some very interesting experiences in Washington, D.C. at that time. Shortly thereafter, I gained employment with Shell Oil Company, and I had basically 8 years of reserve duty in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I lived in Colorado for 12 years. Early in the course of my tenure there, I married my wife, and we've been married just 2 months short of 50 years, 50, and I have 3 sons, 1 in New York, 2 out here in California. Most of my life, I've been a teacher. I took a U-turn. I didn't really want to be an engineer. I wanted to be with people. So I became a teacher, spent most of my time in private schools, but I do have some time in the public schools. Near the end of my tenure, I was often saying to myself, I love educating. I just wish someday I could teach something that's really important. Not that mathematics isn't important, but quite frankly, liberty is far more important. As I feel strongly, it doesn't make any difference what your vocation in life is. You should have a responsibility in your heart to defend liberty. And that's what I've been doing now for the last 8 or 9 years. About 9 years ago, I found myself on a jury pool. I was sitting right behind the defendant, and he objected to something, and the judge cut him off briskly and started reprimanding him with these words: you had an opportunity to have a lawyer. You chose not to have one, and that doesn't give you any special privileges in my courtroom. You'll have to play by all the rules. The entire time that he was scolding the defendant, he was sitting right in front of me, shaking his head vigorously in a negative manner. Now, I had an idea of what was going on because of my previous 20, 30 years of periodically finding myself in court due to traffic tickets. So I had learned a few things along the way. And as I often say, I learned law by doing law. I did go to law school. I didn't last very long because I didn't really feel like I was learning what I wanted to learn. So 2 days later, I was now on the select group of 16 jurors, and the judge went through a couple of points, and he could tell by my body language that I was having some trouble. So as soon as he got done, he said, Juror 14, I see by your body language you're not agreeing with some of the things I'm saying. Why don't you just tell us what your problem is? So the next 5 minutes, I had the courtroom to myself. And when I got done, he said, I think we'll take a brief recess. 15 minutes later, I came back, and I was politely told I could go home. I didn't fit the criteria of a good juror. A good juror does not ask questions. He just nods his head and says, yeah, okay, I get it. Well, that wasn't me. I've always been a curious person. So I went home, but the very next day I came back to the courtroom. And at lunch, I went out to lunch with the defendant, and I questioned him, and he told me what I suspected was true, that he actually met with an attorney, tried to work things out. When he came back into the courtroom, the judge asked the lawyer whether or not they could work together, and he said, Your Honor, based upon my experience and discussion with the defendant, I highly recommend a full psychiatric evaluation, totally unbeknownst to the defendant. So the defendant decided he would be better off on his own. Now, what the defendant really wanted was simply to have a counselor, a legal counsel. But he didn't want to give up his right to defend himself. Now, the second thing I learned from that defendant was Jack and Margie Flynn, who have been teaching constitutional concepts, specifically the power of paper, for over 6 decades. And I say this at this point to the listeners that stay to the end of this interview. I will have a free gift to them. Basically comes from Jack and Margie Flynn, something they gave me and something that I highly recommend everybody have when they put together their affidavits, which is the very basis of the idea of the power of paper. So that in a nutshell brought me to where I am today, where now I'm using the power of paper to effect change with government. So I can pause here if you have a question and you just want me to go on the roll.
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you for your service to our country. My dad was in Vietnam and Korea both. He never talked about it. He was a drill instructor for 26 years in the Army. And my whole family were in the military. And I tried to get into the military, but I have a club foot. So they were like, yeah, no, you're disabled. So I never made it. I registered for the draft and did what I was supposed to do, but I never made it into the military. And I've kind of mixed emotions as to whether or not that would have been a good thing for me. Married 50 years. My wife and I just celebrated 35 years. So that's awesome. 50 years. That's, I think I've met people that have been married for 55 years and 60. So it's very few and far between you hear of people being married that long, especially in today's culture.
That's true. I know very few myself. We don't have very many of those, unfortunately.
So I'm very curious about the affidavit and power of paper and all of that. So I have some questions I can ask, but I would kind of like to give you the floor and let you kind of roll with it.
For sure. My time in the courtroom has largely been around traffic situations. It began back in Colorado over 50 years ago when I was with my fiance. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had a red light go on, and the police officer pulled me over to the side and ended up giving me a ticket for a rolling stop at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, as I said earlier, I'm a kind of a curious person. So I began to wonder, what's going on here? There's obviously no victim, and where is the money going? I'm going to have to pay $200 and some to the government that just gave me the ticket. I paid the ticket, but I began to start thinking, this doesn't seem right. So 38 years ago, I moved to California. Well, in California, it's easier to get tickets, and they're not. I think the smallest ticket you can get out here is a rolling stop, and that's $240. I know people who've gotten speeding tickets in Montana, and it's $50. But California inflates everything, including their tickets. Well, I went to court. I went to court for every one of the tickets that I got, and each time I always tried to defend my right to travel. But I lost, and I lost, and I lost, and I lost. And then I met Jack and Margie Flynn. So when I got another one of these rolling stop tickets, I applied their process. The first thing I did is I wrote the police officer a letter explaining to him exactly what he did wrong. And it might be shocking to most people, but nevertheless, it's true that most traffic stops are a violation of due process. I don't want to talk about traffic specifically, but nevertheless, I used the law to point out to the law enforcement agent what he did wrong. Now, Jack and Margie Flynn said, you write him a letter, certified mail, return request receipt, but you'll never get a response. You just do what you're supposed to do. You treat people the way you would want to be treated. After the officer did not respond, I then formalized the affidavit. The key aspects of the affidavit that we use is this. We have an initial paragraph that points out the responsibility of the receiving officer or the receiving corporate official or the receiving medical examiner for the county, whoever you're spotlighting, their responsibility to answer according to their oath of allegiance to the Constitution. They took an oath, and that oath requires them to answer. And that's the wonderful thing about the petition for redress of grievances, which is in the First Amendment. Now, most Americans can't list what's in the First Amendment, what the 5 rights are. Now, they'll get speech and they might get religion. They probably might get press, might get assembly, but the last one that they'll remember is probably petition, because they, like me, felt that the petition was not much more than just a letter. An affidavit is much, much more than a letter. An affidavit can be taken into a courtroom if it's not rebutted. If properly presented, it can stand alone as evidence and basically disallow the opposition even speak in the courtroom. Now, when my police officer, deputy sheriff in this case, got my affidavit, I'm pretty sure I got a return receipt as well. So I've got proof that he got my affidavit. You have to have proof of service. The sheriff, I don't think he threw that away. He probably sent that up to a guy who gets paid a lot of money to look over legal matters for the county. When I went to court, and I always say, remember, you never go to court alone. You always take a witness with you. You cannot trust the court to do its job properly. There's people that are incompetent there. There's also some people who are not altogether ethical. And in this case, I went to court, and when the police officer walked in, we took note of each other. He gave a piece of paper to the judge, and 5 minutes later, the judge was calling me out and said, Mr. Beck, your case has been dropped. You may go home. Now, Jack and Margie Flynn have got my attention because I've gone to court many times and I've always had an opportunity to speak. I was told here, you don't even need to say anything. You can just go home. So that was $240. Now, you always get I always like to add these little tidbits. You always get the minute order from the clerk. Don't leave without the minute order, because sometimes what you thought happened isn't what goes into the record. So you have to make sure that you get the minute order. So this law enforcement agent recognized that he couldn't rebut my affidavit. So he just folded. He defaulted. He walked away. He let me go because I had the law pinning him down. Now, in the final paragraph of our affidavits, we have these pointed words. You have 30 days to rebut with specificity, to specifics, everything in our affidavit. Otherwise, everything in it may be used against you in any court in America. May, not will. We don't want to take anybody to court. We just want them to stop doing what they're doing. So that's what happened. He decided it's not worth fighting this guy. Now, I often tell people, I believe most of the time you're going to win using the power of paper, but when you win, don't expect them to tell you why you won. You'll never know why. They're not going to tell you why. They're just going to let you go because they're, as they say, bigger fish in the pond to go catch. They're not going to mess with you. What I've tried to recognize is, well, wait, I know this works to defend myself, but can I use it in a more offensive manner? Now, one of the rules of common law and decency is if you perceive that you're going to have a problem with a government official, you ought to notify them in advance. And that's basically what I was doing with the deputy sheriff. I'm notifying him what he did wrong, and I'm giving him plenty of opportunity to repent. So one of the first things I always do, I went to my assemblywoman and my state senator, both of who are on the left, and I introduced myself to them, and I asked them a question that I ask all government officials when I get them isolated. I don't like to embarrass them in front of large crowds. But I'll ask them, according to the Declaration of Independence, what is the very purpose of government? Invariably, I get something along the lines of to protect the people. Well, that's not really correct. I ask them, you know these words, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Do you know the very next words? No, they don't know the very next words, and 99% of Americans don't know it either. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their authority from the consent of the governed. There's a tremendous amount of information in that short statement. But our government officials take their jobs with the understanding that they should be protecting our rights, not infringing upon them. Now, liberty, gun rights, for goodness sakes, how many times a month do I hear government officials who are trying to trespass the rights of gun owners? That seems to be very, very common. In the case of my assemblywoman, She sponsored a bill that would make my priest a felon for simply giving counsel to somebody with sexual dysphoria. Now, I had brought this to her attention that you shouldn't be trying to pass statutes that infringe upon the constitutional rights of the people. 6 months later, here she's sponsoring a bill. So we created an affidavit specifying what she was obviously doing wrong, and we sent it to her along with other people. Some sent letters, some of us sent affidavits. And that bill had passed the Assembly, it had passed the Senate. It was waiting for Jerry Brown, the governor at that time, to sign the bill. They brought the bill together for reconciliation. Our affidavits came in, and we don't know why, but we just know that the bill was dropped. It had been passed in both houses, but now it got dropped. What was even more telling, perhaps, is that about 6 months later, there was a mere resolution that came from the Assembly, and my Assemblywoman did not even sponsor the resolution. She sponsored the bill. Now she won't even sponsor a resolution which has no legal binding. I considered that a win. She's doing what I want her to do, at least stop doing what I don't want her to do. And that's the purpose of being a watchdog over government. About the same time, a couple of years later, actually, now we're in 2020 and I have 2 cases with COVID. The first one was, and I always stop at this point out, hey, you people across the country who think California is totally wacko, take note of this. We have 58 counties in California, and well over 40 of those counties have sheriffs who think the governor and the state legislature is wacko. And they take their oath of office oath of allegiance to the Constitution very seriously. Our sheriff, Chad Bianco, takes it very, very seriously. Seriously enough that he's actually running to be governor. Bianco said, we're not enforcing these mandates. They're just mandates. They're not even statutes. It's just a governor telling people what they ought to do. So he wasn't going to enforce it, but we had a chief medical officer that was running around with his minions telling all these restaurants that they had to close down during COVID. No, you don't. You don't have to close down. You can if you want to, but they can't force you to close down. So again, we got some information out of Massachusetts, and we took this, what's basically called a Fauci dossier, to our chief medical officer. We laid it on his desk and we said, you need to read this and understand that what you're doing is wrong. According to the Code of Federal Regulations, you can't mandate these kind of actions unless you go through certain steps, including creating an independent review board made up of people who have no monetary benefit in the outcome of the study. You have to do that before you can even move to thinking about doing mandate. Well, he didn't respond. He continued to do what he was doing. So we send him the affidavit. Now, it's often the case, sometimes the affidavit doesn't really get their attention. He didn't respond to it. So Jack and Margie said, well then, put the affidavit in another letter, certified letter, send it to your county supervisor because they're supposed to be watching him. And put an affidavit in there calling the supervisors out for being culpable for this errant government officials trespassing of the Constitution. So we did it. And a couple of days later, literally a couple of days later, I got a phone call from a very irate supervisor who was basically telling me, I don't like what you're doing, and I don't see much about it. It just got very blustered. And I said, look, it's obvious. This guy's violating the Constitution. You need to do something about it. Otherwise, you're responsible, and we'll have to take you to court if necessary. Nevertheless, he hung up. He wasn't happy with me. And all I know is that 2 months later, we got what we wanted. The chief medical officer resigned, gone. Now, I don't like the fact that this happens a lot in California. I hope it doesn't happen in South Carolina, but it happens a lot here. Somebody gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar doing something wrong. He'll resign, and the next thing you know, he's also taking his pension with him. Now, you're violating the Constitution. You shouldn't be taking your pension with you, but that's what happened. But he's gone, and that brings up the other COVID situation, which was Best Buy. Best Buy stopped me at the door and said, you can't come in here without a mask on. A mask on? Why? Well, because it's a law. It's not a law. It's a mandate from the governor. It's a good suggestion. You can apply it if you wish, but I, as a citizen, I'm not coming into your store with a mask on. Well, you're not coming in at all. So in this case, because it was a corporate entity, I had to get in my automobile and travel 50 miles to Glendale and serve the corporate reception office with my affidavit. And 3 months later, we were in court. And people say, well, did you win? I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I'd say I had one win. I had 2 wins and 1 loss. The first win was Best Buy had to show up. They sent somebody. They weren't able to send some paperwork in to get out of it. They had to show up. The number 2, Jack and Margie had taught me a long time ago that don't argue the Constitution on the day of the arraignment or the day when you're supposed to meet in the courtroom. You want to do something called a pretrial motion for constitutional rights, preservation of. You want to do that. Well, that's what I tried to do in my case, but I didn't hear back from the court until the day of the hearing, and they said it was denied. Well, they can't deny it, but if they think they can get away with it, they're going to try. So I learned there, I call them the second win, is if I ever try this again, and if I don't hear back from the court a week before the court date, then I'll just go into the court on special appearance and talk to the judge properly and make sure that I get my hearing date in advance. Now, the judge, or in this case, the commissioner, hadn't really seen my affidavit, so I presented it to her. She perused it. She didn't look at it at all. She just perused it and gave it back to me, and then told me that she'd be back with a final judgment, which came very quickly. She ruled in favor of Best Buy. Now, understand something. I didn't want any money. I just wanted Best Buy to stop what they were doing. 2 months later, Best Buy stopped what they were doing. Is that because of my affidavit? I hardly doubt it. I doubt it, because their corporate headquarters is in Minnesota, and they got businesses across the country. My one little affidavit probably didn't shake them too much, but nevertheless, I did what I could do. And that's the responsibility of every American. You do what you can do as often as you can do it. So there you go. That was my situation with Best Buy. Now, I'd like to talk maybe about what I consider one of my most significant victories was that my family roots are back in South Dakota. I went back to see my mom, and I got involved in a legal matter back in South Dakota that required me to show up for court. Well, as I often think, there's no victim to what I did. It's just the government trying to get more money out of me. So, hey, I'll pay the bail. I'm not going to stick around a whole week. I just went back to California. Some years later, I went to get a gun, and I was stopped because I had a bench warrant from South Dakota. Oh my gosh, a bench warrant. Of course, I didn't show up, so they put a bench warrant on me. So I applied this process that Jack and Margie. The bottom line is common law, common sense. I didn't hurt anybody. There's no victim. There can't be a crime. So I put this application, this legal theory, in my opinion, into an affidavit and sent it to the presiding judge. So this is more than a decade after the arrest. He did not respond. So I put the affidavit into another letter with an affidavit to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of South Dakota. And a month and a half later, I was checking, and my bench warrant was gone. Well, that's pretty significant to me, that a bench warrant was removed just by the power of paper. Again, if you've hurt somebody, then pay your dues. But unfortunately, in America today, you can find yourself in all kinds of trouble, and you haven't hurt anybody. And that's where we are. And now, presently, we're working on another affidavit. This one's to our Attorney General, state of California. He has a half dozen affidavits on his desk right now, pertinent to his actions against pro-life protesters. I don't know if your audience is aware of a man named David Daleiden. He's the journalist who did a sting on Planned Parenthood and revealed to the American public that Planned Parenthood sells the organs of aborted babies. Now, David Daleiden did everything according to the law. He interviewed them in a public forum where it's perfectly legal to video the actions. He just simply made those videos available to the American public. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General at that time. She sent a SWAT team to his house and raided everything. The subsequent Attorney Generals, now the present one is Bonta, has continued to harass and seek criminal actions against David Daleiden. We were aware that the Ninth Appellate Court out here in the West Coast took a similar law from Oregon that was infringing upon the rights of journalists to videotape recordings. They found that law to be unconstitutional. As a matter of fact, it's not a law, I should add. Statutes are not laws unless they're constitutional. Now, the court out here said this statute is not constitutional. The California statute was exactly the same. So we sent an affidavit to Bonta and pointed out what he was doing wrong and the fact that why are you harassing this guy when the Oregon law is already proved to be unconstitutional? Well, he dropped the case against Bonta. Did he drop it because of our affidavits? I'd like to think so, but I don't know so. Nevertheless, with the new administration in Washington, D.C., Stephen Miller sent Bonta a letter basically saying if you persist in your defense of sanctuary state status, you yourself can be liable for criminal and civil actions. And he pointed out specifically the code section in the federal code that Bonta is violating. Whoa, that's what I wanted. I didn't have to do any research at all. The difference between the federal government going after Bonta and us, the people, we the people going after Bonta is this. They can only go after Bonta in his official capacity, which means the state of California, if they find themselves responsible, no money's coming out of Bonta's pocket. It'll come out of the taxpayer. But the interesting thing, and I hope the audience gets this, only we, the people, have the authority to go after a government official in his personal capacity. After all, he personally took an oath of allegiance to the Constitution before his master, which is we the people. He said he was going to honor his oath. We're sending an affidavit saying, I don't think so. I don't think you're doing a very good job, and you need to stop. You need to get in line with the federal government. This is one of their established criteria. They are responsible for immigration law. So presently, our affidavit before Bonta has to do with sanctuary status as well as what he continues to do regarding other pro-life organizations. So we have 6 affidavits there. What I'm also doing is I'm contacting Americans across the country. Like I have a couple of brothers in South Dakota. I said, well, listen, you're always complaining about California. Why don't you do something about California? I'll send you a letter of notification. You just copy it, change a few things, just don't threaten anybody, and then send it over there for a 73-cent stamp and let the Attorney General for the state of California know, hey, this thing is getting outside the state boundaries. There's even people in other states that are involved in notifying me of my unconstitutional actions. We have letters of notification coming from at least a dozen states now. This is part of the common law, is if they come after you, they're coming after me. Any violation of James Moffat's constitutional rights is basically something that I should be concerned about. And this is one of the things they don't want. They want you got to have standing. No, I don't. Not in common law. In statutory jurisdiction, yes, I have to have standing. In common law, guided by common sense and common decency, I have a responsibility to come to the aid of any American who's being abused by government or corporate officials who took an oath and are now violating it. That, in essence, is what the power of paper is. It's simply holding them accountable to their oath of office. And when they violate their oath of office, then we have the initial paragraph notifying them of what they must do, and the final paragraph that notifies them of the possibility of legal action if they don't change what they're doing. Now, the body of the paragraph changes. I have yet to do one affidavit that references the Second Amendment. It just hasn't been an issue that I'm pursuing. I'm pursuing free speech, freedom of religion, and assembly. Hey, got a right to be in a restaurant. You can't tell us we have to shut down just because you think COVID's a problem. We now look back and say, well, COVID wasn't that big of a problem. unless you were an older person in a rest home. The rest of us did pretty well with COVID. There you go. I'm taking a breath, James.
Very good. So as I'm sitting here thinking about this and listening to you talk, I'm on the board of directors for South Carolina Carry, which is a 501c4 nonprofit gun education, gun safety, Second Amendment liberties sort of organization here in South Carolina. And we've been in existence since 2015, and we worked hand in hand with Palmetto Gun Rights and other sister organizations to further our Second Amendment rights, and including open carry, constitutional carry, blah blah blah. Right, and I think 2 years ago we got constitutional carry passed. You can either open carry or you can concealed carry. If you go across state lines and you want reciprocity with other states that recognize our CWP, then obviously you have to have a current CWP. Otherwise, you don't have to have one. So what's been happening is we have parks and recreation county officials who have decided, despite what the Attorney General has written in state law as far as gun rights are concerned, they've decided to put up no concealed carry or no weapons signs all over the place. And so we have, as our members and citizens of the state of South Carolina have made us aware of these things by taking pictures and sending it to us, saying, "Hey, this county, Berkeley County, Charleston County, Dorchester County, all these different counties across South Carolina are putting up these no concealed carry weapon signs, and it's directly opposed by state gun laws." And the Attorney General has sent out or produced several opinions since then, telling these county officials that what you're doing is unlawful, illegal. Stop doing it. Just quit doing it. And despite these county officials being told these things and shown these things, they're still popping up all over the state. People are these county governments or county officials, whatever role that they play, right, in county government. The last one that we heard of and are still dealing with is in Greenville County. The county officials didn't do it, but the employees of the county official did it. And they said, "Hey, we just felt like we could do that because it was going to make everybody feel safe." And we're like, hold on, there's a state law in place that basically says that's unlawful. You can't do that. You can't keep people from carrying weapons. Now, the law does say that if a county government, we'll say a park, a state park or a county park or whatever, they're having an event, right? The event has to be published and it has to have a beginning time and an end time. During that event, the state government or the county government or the municipality or whoever, they can keep people from carrying weapons to that event, right? That's not the entire park. That's just at that event. And when the event's over, that restriction is lifted. And obviously, there's a list of places that you can't carry a firearm, and one of those is a private business owner, like the county parks office where they issue permits and they handle money, right? So they can put a legal no concealed carry weapon sign on the outside of that business office door, and they can keep you from carrying a weapon in there. But they can't put it at the entrance to the state park or the county park and prohibit the carrying of weapons in the entire park. Well, there's a lot of ignorant or people that just don't give a flip what state law is, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're facing here in South Carolina. And as I listen to you talk, I'm thinking we have government officials everywhere, not just in California, but South Carolina, Washington, D.C. We have corrupt officials in our own state government in Columbia, South Carolina, that are doing things that are infringing on our rights or on our constitutional rights. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show, is because I think a lot of citizens are under the impression that, oh, well, he's a municipal judge, or he's a state judge, or he's a county judge, or he's a whatever the government official is, that when they say something, it's gospel. And after listening to you talk for the last 30 minutes, it's like these government officials are trying to pull the wool over our eyes and And I don't think all of them are, we can't use a broad paintbrush and paint all of them, as unethical or law breaking or intentionally breaking our
Absolutely.
constitutional rights.
Right.
However, as you've identified, there are government officials, judges, district attorneys, whoever, that they're abusing their power.
And what I said was, I often will hear about an abuse of power, and my quick response is, who's the person at the top of that agency? Or who sponsored that bill? And most often I get, I don't know. Well, that's the problem. Who's responsible for those signs going up there? There's some guy, you got a couple of people out here who are unilaterally deciding that they want to put signs up, but there's an agency in charge of those guys. You got to find out who that is. You got to write an affidavit that has good information. When, where, what, why, what happened goes in the body of the affidavit. And then you use those very important paragraphs precisely. And I should add this. In the first paragraph, I list the different amendments to the state and federal constitution that are being violated. I mention the person by name. I point out you have taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States, as well as probably the state of South Carolina. You took the oath, you have to obey it. When the individual person is called out and is told at the back end of the affidavit, everything in it can be used against you, John Murphy, Karen Aldridge, Ray Bonta, in any court in America, it's different. Now you're calling one person out, and if he go in California, we have a wonderful situation here because in California we can sue for discrimination. I was giving some talks in Wisconsin. They said we can't do that. But in small claims court in California, you can. So obviously anybody who's infringing upon our First Amendment rights or our Second Amendment rights can be hauled into a small claims court for $50 and bring them in and have your day in court. Now, I point out the judges are a little bit different situation, in my opinion. In order to go after the judges, we have to get a more of a critical mass of people who understand the common law. James, I'm going to quote something from the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to do it very slowly so the audience can catch this. He, speaking of the king, has combined with others, speaking of the colonial governors and the parliament. Back up. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. Stop. Declaration of Independence, 1776. Constitution, 1787. He's not talking about the United States Constitution. He's talking about English common law. That's why the C in Constitution isn't capitalized. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws. Laws is capitalized. Unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of, here it comes, their acts of pretended legislation. End quote. The American people need to understand when a city, a county, a state, or a federal entity passes a statute or an ordinance that's unconstitutional, it is pretended legislation. However, if the American people consent to it, it becomes legal and it can put you in big trouble. If you're going to not consent, then you need to consent you need to voice your disconsent as soon as possible. So here's an illustration of that. I truly believe I can get in my automobile and travel and not be subject to the motor vehicle code because the motor vehicle code is commerce. It's easy to go into the Code of Federal Regulations and get a specific definition for driving. It has to do with commerce. I'm not involved in commerce when I go to the grocery store. I am involved in commerce when I take a drug addict to Tijuana. In that case, I go get a rental car and I have a driver's license and I'm in commerce. But otherwise, I'm not. So that goes into the body of my affidavit. And when I present it to the DMV, I'm not going to just say, well, I have a right to travel. Well, that's true. you also have a responsibility to notify potential adversaries. So I notified the DMV. By the way, I still have a driver's license. I still have proof of insurance. My problem is I'm not paying my registration anymore because I'm not involved in commerce. Okay, I don't want to, like I said earlier, I don't want to talk about traffic. But basically, the process is I notified the DMV. They came back with a letter, not an affidavit rebutting mine, just a letter saying, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, don't bother us anymore. Fine. Now I take that affidavit, I put it in an envelope along with an affidavit to the police chief, along another one to the sheriff, another one to the highway patrol. I carry those in my car. So should I be stopped, hopefully for not another rolling stop, I would present driver's license, I would present my proof of insurance. I would then ask you for the police department. Okay, then here's this one for you. You can notify, this is an affidavit to your boss. Now read it carefully. It's very short, but read it carefully. Because if you're violating my rights, your boss is going to get involved in this as well. I've been stopped 3 times. Well, not stopped, but I've had interactions with police officers, highway patrol, and deputies 3 times. And in all 3 cases, they just said, you're good to go. They didn't give me a ticket. They just let me go. Again, I was never doing anything that hurt anybody. I wasn't driving very fast. Matter of fact, in one case, I was just parked with my front wheels on a red section of the curbing. Police officer knocked on my window and said, you're misparked, your front wheel. Okay, I need to see your driver's license. She took the driver's license, walked past my expired registrations that were over a year and a half old, came back and said, you're free to go. Have a nice day. Now, I don't know why they're not bothering me. I just know they're not bothering me. And I know that I'm following the rules of proper notification. Due process, first rule, notify your adversaries, even if they're only potential adversaries. Don't assume that you have rights. Assume that you need to defend them. And if you can't defend them, you really don't have them. And you're never belligerent to police officers. The thin blue line is true. They're out there 98% of the time to protect us. So we give them great respect, and we respect judges, DAs, sheriffs, everybody. But
Absolutely.
we the people are responsible for the guardianship of liberty. I don't expect government to oversee government. It's we the people who must oversee government.
Amen. I agree. Is there a website people can go to get this information?
Remedyatlaw.us. Remedy, REMEDY, @AT, law, LAW.us is my website. And it points out that I have a course called The Power of Paper. It's 14 modules. It explains what I've been talking about here in greater detail. One of the things that I don't have time to talk about is how to present yourself before the judge. There's a way you have to do that. So the other website is affidavitsecrets.com. Affidavit is singular, secrets is plural, .com /gun rights, /gun rights, one word, gun rights. And if you go to that one, you can give us a method by which we can get to you the free gift, which is the template of the first paragraph and the last paragraph, so that you have an understanding of how to box the corporate or government official in to his responsibility to answer and what happens if he doesn't. Potentially could happen if he doesn't.
Okay, so give me the second URL again.
Affidavit,
I'm trying to take
IDAVIT, secrets, affidavitsecrets.com /gun rights. So we'll see,
So it's
we'll know who.
AFFIDADIT secrets.com /gun rights.
.com
Got it.
/.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
And what's the other URL?
Remedyatlaw.us. Now, There it lists the course for so much money, $200. But if you go to affidavitsecrets.com, you can get it 50% off. We're also going to point out this book that I'm getting it published this week. Basically, this book, Officer Hanson Compassion in Blue, Finding Strength Through Virtue, is a book that I began over 20 years ago, telling stories to my son about a good cop, because the great majority of the cops are good cops, and we the people have to get rid of the bad cops. And that's our job also. So that's what my book talks about. The last 8 chapters of my book are about the power of paper.
So it's Officer Hanson, Hanson.
Yeah.
Hanson, okay, Compassion in Blue. Okay. And
yeah.
they can get that on Amazon or?
Yeah, it should be up there, and by the time this thing airs, they go to the website. We will give them every other day a chapter synopsis from the book, so you can find out what each chapter is about. Hopefully that'll wet your whistle and you'll want to buy this book, because the proceeds for this book are going to enhance what we're doing, not just in California, but across the country. Americans have to understand the law. When the colonial governors wrote back to Parliament and the king, they often made this comment: these damn Americans are all a bunch of lawyers. We were blessed with those 55 men that went to Philadelphia and gave us the Declaration of Independence. They weren't perfect by far, but they were pretty outstanding men compared to what we've got running this country today. And we, the people, have to pick up where they left off, and we have to do the work of diligently observing liberty.
Amen. Well, that falls directly in line. That falls directly in line with what I want this podcast to be about. And Kirk Beck, I appreciate you being on the episode or on the podcast, and I would think I would like to have you back as a guest speaker at some point if you have time.
Common law.
And to my listeners,
we got to talk about the common law. Okay.
That's right. So to my listeners, I'm going to say thank you for the privilege of your time. Our podcast is hosted on Captivate.fm, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. Be sure to share our podcast episodes with your Second Amendment friends, family, and coworkers. You can contact us at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. It's Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. I would also encourage you to visit these 2 websites, remedyatlaw.us and affidavitssecrets.com/gunrights to look at the material that Captain Kirk has put together. And also he's coming out with a book called Officer Hanson Compassion in Blue, and that will be available soon, I guess. Okay, very good. So yeah, keep looking at Amazon and other publishers, I guess, that would provide that for sale online, right?
Right on.
Am I saying the right thing there?
Amazon will have it.
Okay, good. All right, so having said all of that, I want to say thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Thank you, Captain Kirk, for being here, and we'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.
Goodbye now.